Good morning and welcome to the KDE webcast this morning. My name is David Cook. I'm the Director of Innovation at the Kentucky Department of Education, and today we're going to be talking with you all about changes that are coming in the non-traditional instruction program. We hope that you will gain some insight as to some changes that occurred because of Senate Bill 73, which was in our last legislative session. The first thing I want to talk to you about today, just a little quick history, not take too much time. Many of you know that have been around for a while that in 2011 the Kentucky General Assembly enacted a pilot program at the bequest of former Commissioner Holliday for non-traditional instruction. The Snowbound Pilot, as we call it at the time, gave districts who had missed an excessive amount of school due to weather or health or safety related reasons the opportunity to have school on days when they normally couldn't be in their buildings because of weather, flu, other kinds of emergency situations. We started with just a few districts in that pilot phase, and the idea was that if you had missed up to 20 days of school the previous several years, 3 years to be exact, you had the opportunity to get back about half of those days through the NTI program. In 2014, through House Bill 211, the restriction that gave a certain number of days missed was removed, which by inference allowed the program to be open to all 173 districts. And now, in 2018, which is why we're here today, the General Assembly passed Senate Bill 73, which created the requirement that an administrative regulation be promulgated by the Kentucky State Board of Education so that we would have some guidance as to how the program should be implemented. I wanted to show you basically Senate Bill 73 and the language change that was made to the school calendar law. KRS 158070 is the school calendar law that talks to you all about how many days a year you have to have school, how many days a year teachers are required to work. And in Section 9 of that law is where NTI has always been housed, but a couple of changes or things I want to point out that are really important for us to know as we move forward. In red on the screen, you will see a section that is not new to the law, but it's something that I think is very important for us always to be mindful of, because my staff and I sometimes have to deal with requests for NTI days that are not meeting the letter of the law. So I wanted to point out again in the red section, the section that says the Commissioner of Education may grant up to the equivalent of 10 student attendance days for non-traditional instruction based on a plan approved by the Commissioner of Education. And the key I wanted to point out is the end of that sentence, which is on days when the school district is closed for health or safety reasons. That's the very first thing that the staff does when they're looking at whether or not a day should be approved. Is it for health or safety reasons? Obviously, safety reasons are usually where weather falls, which is the primary purpose that people use non-traditional instruction for. But we also have flu, other kinds of illness. Could have a tornado. We could have other reasons that things might go require an NTI day. The one that happened last year, which was a safety concern primarily with first responders in certain parts of the state, was the eclipse that occurred last year, and we approved eclipse as a non-traditional instruction day because there was a safety concern with students going to the buildings on that day. So that's an example of another reason for safety for NTI. The section I really want you to focus on, though, and which is where we'll come from today, is this underlined bolded section in black, which is the new language, which will take effect for it's currently in effect for those districts already in the program, and moving forward will be in effect for anybody who applies for the program in subsequent years. And that is this language. The district's plan shall indicate how the non-traditional instruction process shall be a continuation of learning that is occurring on regular student attendance days. Instructional delivery methods, including the use of technology, shall be clearly delineated in the plan. The reason that's important is while I think that's been inferred and understood by our districts as we've moved through the program in the past, without this specific language in the law, it wasn't technically a requirement, although it was, I think, understood by most of our districts that what you should be doing on a non-traditional instruction day is providing students with an opportunity to continue their learning. So it's now codified in statute, which makes it a little bit more upfront and a place where folks can look to see what kinds of activities should be happening on non-traditional instruction days. Also in the new law, the new section of 158.070, it specifically laid out the administrative regulation process, which KDE will promulgate through the Kentucky Board of Education, and what needs to be in that administrative regulation. Before this regulation requirement came into effect, we basically operated the program on just general guidance that staff had written. Now we have an official administrative regulation that is processing its way through the system. The Kentucky Board of Education has already approved it. As you know, administrative regulations also require the legislature to do a review of them, so we're in the process of that and should have the final approval of the regulation sometime, I would imagine, in January. But by December 31st, as it says here, the regulation has to be promulgated, which it has been. And you can see on this page the things that it requires us to have in place so people can review them and look at them, and we can use them for both implementation and monitoring activities. Basically, the application, what the districts are required to submit to us for proof that learning was occurring on the days in question, how the district's application will be approved, how long the approval is, how they renew their application, what we as the Department of Education are required to do to provide oversight and reporting to anyone that needs that information, and any other components that are deemed necessary to implement the section. This is what's new from the new regulation. This is a description of how the district, needs to be incorporated into their application that they submit to us. You can see here a description of instructional delivery methods, how the district will provide access to online resources, C, a description of how the district shall ensure a continuation of learning from regular student attendance days, how the district will implement things like individual education plans for students with disabilities, and how the ARC will be involved in that, a description of how 504 plans, gifted student service plans, English language learner plans, all of those things are going to be handled during non-traditional instruction days. And a description of how you are going to measure student participation, which is the kind of synonym we use for attendance on non-traditional instruction days. Obviously, attendance is a different situation, so what we do is we measure how many students completed assignments on the non-traditional instruction day, and that, in fact, is the standard by which we measure, quote, attendance on a non-traditional instruction day. Again, some additional information that the application will be required to include how professional learning is going to be occurring in order to prepare for these non-traditional instruction days, how the district interacts with other agencies and organizations. Many districts that are non-traditional instruction districts have contracts with early learning centers. They have contracts with their ATC in their area, and sometimes when that ATC serves multiple counties, other counties in that service center aren't closed or aren't doing NTI, and so there has to be some understanding about how students will be treated on those days. Also, additionally, we have information about how information is being interplayed with stakeholders, how the district will relay information about non-traditional, whether that's going to be through some system like a one call or whether it's going to be through other social media, and then any other evidence that we need as the department to effectively review and approve the plan. Something else that's a little new under the new regulation is we used to be date driven. We used to say that there was a certain point in time where applications had to be submitted. We're moving to, under the new regulation, a somewhat more rolling kind of process. And basically the new rule is that your application must be submitted to us at least 120 days prior to the beginning of the school term that you want the application considered for, which means that technically you could do it 120 days prior to the start of the school term, or you could do it 250 days prior to the start of the school term. You have more of an open window. We're not setting sort of an application window, so to speak, as much as we're saying as long as you get it in by 120 days prior. That also means that if districts are starting at different times, a district that may start later has a little bit more time to complete the application process. We talk all the time about the benefits of non-traditional instruction. The biggest benefit, and we will say this as long as the program's in place, is there's a continuity that comes from non-traditional instruction that can't be overlooked. Learning loss is reduced. Students and teachers continue to be engaged on days when they normally would probably be doing other things. And one of the other things that I don't think we think too often about is non-traditional instruction days are truly the days in a calendar, a school calendar, where learning is actually evidenced. Individual teachers in every building in this state on any student attendance day can tell you what students did that day and learned, but they're not required to report that up to the state. On non-traditional instruction days, of course, they are. So there is a additional layer of evidence that happens for students and teachers in a non-traditional instruction setting. Teachers will tell you, back to the first bullet, that continuity is something that is extremely important with non-traditional instruction. Many of them will tell us that on days when they worked in a district or before their district had NTI, they could miss a week of school, maybe even 2 weeks of school in a row, and then they came back to the classroom, and it took several days for students to be re-engaged in their learning because they had been off doing whatever they were doing on those days off because of the snow or the weather or the illness. With non-traditional instruction, that continuity problem seems to be greatly reduced. If I'm missing 2 weeks of school, but I've had 4 or 5 NTI days in the midst of that missing time, I'm learning. And when the teachers say when the kids come back, getting them back on track is a whole lot less of a problem. It's in some of the things that we probably never thought of when we first started the program that have become incredibly important things for communities. We actually have greater participation by parents on non-traditional instruction days than other days because they have to be. They have to be there available when they can for their students to assist in assignments. They interact with teachers a lot more frequently. There's a time management element for students because a lot of them want to get out and play in the snow, so they got to get that work done. It's a perfect entry point for blended learning models where you share technology and teacher-driven instruction if your district hasn't gotten involved in that. And of course, every student will tell you, and teachers too, but students primarily, that they get out of school earlier because they don't have to make up all those days at the end of the year. I think those are all incredibly important things about the program that make it valuable to folks, is that their abilities to interact with the stakeholders and each other are far more intentional, I think is the best word the best way to put it. The one that we don't really have up here that I've heard anecdotally from teachers is there's actually more teacher connection point too. They like the opportunities that being in, some of them come to the building on a snow day because that's the way the district operates the program, and they get to actually walk across the hall and talk with teachers that do the same thing they do and have the same content areas as they have, which they wouldn't get to do on a normal school day because kids are all rushing around. So there's added benefits that come sort of indirectly. Oop, what did I do? There we go. Hit the wrong button. One of the things that we do highly recommend districts do, it's not in the law or in the regulations specifically, but that they have a digital learning platform, a learning management system, as most people would call it. The ones that we see most often are Canvas, Edmodo, Blackboard, Google Classroom. Those things are really important because the management of the lessons, the management of teacher interactions with both students and parents happen through those systems. What we found in the really high-performing districts is they're almost flipping everything around, and their regular instructional days are becoming like their non-traditional instruction days started out. What we're seeing across the board is districts using these learning management systems on every day. And it's the way that teachers present homework to students. It's the way that lessons are submitted by students, or work assignments are submitted by students on a regular daily basis, which makes it really great on non-traditional days because there's not a lot of change from the student perspective about how they're learning. They're simply just not in the building doing it. They're doing it from their home. As I mentioned, blended learning becomes very, very prevalent in a non-traditional instruction program. A lot of flipped classrooms. There's a great deal of project-based learning, as you know. Cross-curricular teams build long-term projects. It's one of the best ways we've seen non-traditional instruction to be effective is that rather than trying to set an assignment that you tie to 1 day or 2 days or 3 days that's within your 10-day limit of non-traditional instruction, you build a project across both semesters of the year even, and you may even start the project prior to the snow coming and finish it afterwards. But what you know is it makes it really simple for all involved that on the days when you're out for non-traditional instruction days, what you work on is the project. And so you don't have to think about, okay, which is this day 3 that I do the assignments for, or is this day 4? You're in more of a mode of, oh, I got to work on my project today. I think it's always important that we recognize what NTI won't do, and it's never intended to do, and it's not in the law, and it's not in the things that we talk about. And the first one is kind of hard because I think sometimes people don't quite understand what we're talking about, but you shouldn't be doing NTI simply as a way to not have to make up student attendance days. That's not the purpose. The purpose truly is a continuation of learning. It's a way to make sure learning continues and loss isn't occurring when students have to be out for extended periods of time. When we find districts doing it for that reason, it's a much more effective program than simply people saying, oh, well, I don't want to have to make up these 5 days, so I'm going to take NTI days. There's a far less quality of work that happens on days when that's the reasoning. We haven't found, as you might expect, we haven't found in most cases that there is an increase in student achievement because of NTI, but there is certainly no evidence that it's reduced. Over the years, we've collected a lot of data, and we see districts at least maintaining their student achievement levels. But most of the time, and that wasn't the purpose of the program in any way, because I don't think you can expect non-traditional instruction to have a high positive effect on greatly increasing test scores or reducing gaps, although it can make sure that they are maintained. And as I said a minute ago, one of the things that we found to be very true in particularly the districts doing the best job with NTI is eventually we hope that you won't treat NTI as something different than the way you treat a regular student attendance day. It's just a location that's different, that your teachers are using similar instructional processes on regular days and on non-traditional days, and they just have a different delivery system. Challenges, and always challenges. Funding. You don't get transportation or food reimbursement for non-traditional days. And some folks don't like the fact that even if you had really high participation rates on NTI days, you only get your ADA from the previous year. We have found, and I'm not sure exactly the exact average, but and I might have a slide here at the end, we have found that participation rates for students on NTI days actually are a little higher in many cases than the regular attendance numbers are for districts. There's an engagement level because kids are enjoying the projects and being able to work in both inside their houses and out in their yards, maybe if they're doing a science project on an NTI day. Again, you have to deal with special needs students, students with disabilities, and compliance with those programs and those requirements. Again, pointing out that Senate Bill 73 made the requirement that it has to be a continuation of learning. We can't simply do NTI and sort of pass out worksheets or things that are not connected to the standards that those students are learning that particular year. And we've always had issues, but districts have found creative ways to deal with this, where a household may only have one device, or they don't have internet. Many districts have learned how to upload their assignments onto devices that don't require the internet, so they could be a device that has capabilities of just storing the information on those days. Just oversight challenges real quickly for us. People wanting to have NTI days happen on days that aren't for health or safety reasons. That happens quite regularly. Just a reminder, we'll joke about it today, but I know that my staff is going to get calls coming up here in the springtime. You can't take an NTI day to go to the state tournament. Probably the biggest thing that is frustrating for folks here at the department who are used to monitoring programs is you can't monitor this program the way you monitor others, because it's hard to get to a district when it's snowing to see the program in action on a first-hand basis. So much of what we have to do to monitor is through the use of interviews with students and parents and teachers, because we can't get there to actually monitor it when it's happening. And again, we do have bad actors who assign worksheets on NTI days. Here's the current year, or last year's data, I mean, for how many districts participated. You can see 75 districts participated last year. The districts ranged from one of our smallest districts, to one of 11,000 students. They averaged using 7.1 days. And the student participation rate, 93%, which again, I think overall is above the state average for regular attendance. And teacher participation is almost at 100. This year, as I mentioned, we have 83 districts participating, about the same size districts, because most of them are the same districts. And we obviously don't know yet how many days they will use or what the participation rates are. And there's a picture of where we are in the state. And I always use this map at the end of presentations to say there's a couple of places that I'm really hoping that we can get a little bit more interest in the program. In northern Kentucky, the Northern Kentucky Co-op area, we don't have any districts participating in NTI, which has been something we've tried to talk to them about, and we've started to get some interest. And then if you look sort of down in the Grec area, we have a few, but still quite a few of the districts who are not participating. So we hope to get a greater number of districts participating moving forward. I think that is the last slide. Didn't leave much room for questions, but are there any questions, Beth?
I haven't gotten any questions.
Okay.